you. Okay, so let's get right into decision tree. It's one of those topics that ICAN is really interested in these days with the new syllabus. Okay, so we're going to use question 2 in the pilot SFM question pack to consider decision tree. Now let's take a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes or less, to discuss some of the knowledge aspect or key principles whenever you're dealing with decision tree. Okay, so decision tree. Okay. All right, so why is decision tree important for strategic financial managers? And the reason is because the future is filled with uncertainty. The future is filled with uncertainty, with many possible outcomes. And that's the truth. So there are many possible outcomes. So take, for example, that as a strategic financial manager, you decide to consider an international investment appraisal in a foreign country. We just finished the topic, so let's make reference to that. You might project and say, okay, this is our expected return in year 1, this is our expected return in year 2, this is our expected return in year 3. But the truth is, can you with certainty say that that is what would happen? No, you can't, because of uncertainty. A lot of things can happen. There are different possible outcomes. So whenever you're making decisions about the future and you're looking at the different possible outcomes, then a key principle we can adopt would be to make use of a decision tree. Now, the key thing I want you guys to pick from what I just said now is that decision tree is only concerned about decisions about the future. So if the question has any details or information about the past, please, that is not relevant to us because we're only concerned about the future. And that will be our only focus. That's one thing you need to take note about, take note of. The second thing you need to take note of is that each possible outcome has some probability of occurrence. So it has some probability of occurrence attached to it. So for example, somebody says, oh, I have an interview tomorrow, and I'm concerned about a number of things. One, it's maybe say rain. The next question will be, what's the probability or the possibility that it might rain? So every occurrence, every event has some level of probability to it. If the probability is very high, it shows that there's a high chance of it happening. But if the probability is very low, we know that there's a lower chance of it happening. So we take that into consideration as well. 3, always bear in mind the concept of present value, which is the discounted amount. That is because as strategic financial managers, your calculation on any topic is never complete unless you do what? You find the present value or you discount. So if you have decision tree question and you're trying to solve for decision tree, always bear in mind that all the values you have in that decision tree questions, you need to discount them to find the present value. So we wouldn't use them at face value. And finally, before we move ahead, is the symbols to use. Now, if you have to make a decision, for example, I need to make a decision whether I should invest or not invest. This is a symbol we use to designate or to denote that what we have in front of us is a decision. So this is a symbol we would use. So when you have to make a decision, it means that it's either you would go with decision A, or maybe you would go with decision B, or maybe you would go with decision C. So this or this or this, whatever the possible decisions are, you make a decision. Now, when you make a decision, there might be possible outcome from that decision. And when there are possible outcome from that decision, we make use of this symbol, which is the possible outcome. So those are the symbols we would use, the decision and a possible outcome. And then final point to note is that when we finish drawing our graph or we finish drawing our decision tree, we solve it backwards. So let me write it. So decision trees are mapped from left to right. They are mapped from left to right, but solved from right to left. But solved from right to left. So we're going to see that play out when we solve our question. So they are mapped from left to right, but they are solved from right to left. Guys, these are the key principles you must bear in mind whenever you have a question on decision tree. And we just follow the logic as it is in the question. Don't overthink it. Just know that when you have a decision, you make use of the symbol. When there's an outcome, you make use of this. Just know that for all of our values, we would discount it. Very, very important. And then we know that there would always be probability to it, and then we would solve it from right to left. All right, guys. So let's go right to our question then and apply this principle. So for each of them, I'm going to still come back to this principle and just explain to you guys how it plays out. So let's begin. First thing we said is about the future. So it's not about the past. So let's go ahead and look at our decision tree. Question 2 now. Let's move ahead. An educational consult company, Educonsult, has raised 402 million to establish a unique private university. The establishment of the university depends upon obtaining the necessary approval from the relevant government agency. It is believed that this approval will be given in 2 years' time. So that has happened. They've raised the amount. They've applied for government approval to establish a private university, and they are waiting for it to happen in 2 years' time. That has already happened. It's not a future decision. So we can apply decision tree to that first line. So let's move on and see what the future decisions are, and then we'll then know where we're applying the stuff into. In the interim, the 420 million, which is this, can be invested in the money market to yield a return of 12% per year. The money market is considered to be an efficient market. So that is a very important point. The money market is an efficient market. I'm going to come back and explain this concept of efficient market and why it's very important. So that is the first option. Invest it in a money market and the market is efficient. Alternatively, an opportunity exists for the fund to be invested on a temporary basis in Road Flight Ltd, which is RFL, a luxurious intra-city road transport company which wishes to expand its fleet of vehicles. RFL is temporarily short of funds. If the funds are invested with RFL, they will produce an annual net cash inflow to Educonsult, but the size of the cash flow is not known with certainty. And cash flow at the end of the second year is dependent upon the cash flow at the end of the first year. Estimates of the net cash inflows to Educonsult are detailed below. So I'm going to still read this question, so I'm just scanning through it. So I just read that. So these are the details. In addition, RFL will make a payment to Educonsult at the end of the first year of 282 million, or at the end of the second year of 162 million. Educonsult has to choose at the end of the first year whether to receive the payment of 282 million then or 162 million a year later. If payment of 282 million is received by Educonsult at the end of the first year, the investment will be terminated and there will be no further cash flow. So there's an option to terminate the investment. The cost of capital of 18% is considered to be appropriate in RFL business. Required, prepared using decision tree to show whether Educonsult should invest in RFL or in the money market. So that's the decision. Do we do RFL or do we do money market? Notes: 1, the fully annotated decision tree is required. 2, show calculations to the nearest million. Then the B part, it's a theoretical part, give a critical assessment of the use of expected value criterion in capital investment analysis. All right, guys. So that's our focus. Should we invest in RFL or in the money market? I'm going to make use of decision tree. So let's go back and begin to read the question and map it as we read the question. So that thing about decision tree, you map it as you read through the different decision points. So let's go back to our question. We're going to start from here, which is where the decision is. Right here. All right. So let's begin and read. As we read, we're going to map. It says, and then we're going to show our calculation because it says we should show our calculation. I think it says that. Yeah, show calculation to the nearest. So we're going to show our calculation as well. All right, so let's begin. It says, in the interim, the 402 million can be invested in the money market to yield a return of 12%. Alternatively, an investment exists for the fund to be invested in a temporary basis in Road Flight Ltd. So with our 402 million, we need to make a decision. Do we invest in money market or do we invest in RFL? That is the first point. So let's put our decision. So that's the first decision we need to make. Do we invest in money market or do we invest in RFL? So it's a decision. We use the decision symbol. So we have 402 million at the start of the project, at the start, which is year 1. So do we invest in money market or do we invest in RFL? RFL. Where do we put our money? Let's go back and see what happens. It says that I'm going to read out this part. It says, in the interim, can we invest in money market to yield a return of 12%? The money market is considered to be an efficient market. Okay, so if you've read the concept of efficient market, let's explain the concept of efficient market quickly because that concept is important for our calculation. So an efficient market is one where the rates / prices reflect all available information. And as such, because the rate and price reflect all available information, the NPV in an efficient market would always be equal to 0 because it is risk-free. It is risk-free. Yeah, there's no uncertainty. The price, whatever the value is being traded, reflects all available information. So there is no uncertainty. And because there's no uncertainty, the rate of return would always be equal to the cost of capital because investors are not expecting a premium because the perfect market is an efficient market. So the NPV would be 0 in an efficient market. So what that means is that if Educonsult, let me write down the name right here, Educonsult. What it means is that if Educonsult decides to invest in the money market because it is an efficient market, one that the prices and the rates reflect all available information, because it's an efficient market, the NPV would be 0 because it's an efficient market. So that is one of the decisions that Edu PLC has to make. Now let's go back and continue what happens after they've made. We don't know what the NPV is if they go through the alternative, the road, the RFL. We don't know what the NPV is yet because we've not looked at what the values or the returns are expected to be. So let's go ahead and see what is the return if they decide to go for RFL. All right, so let's get reading. It says, alternatively, I'm reading here again, an opportunity exists for the funds to be invested on a temporary basis in Road Flight Limited, a luxurious intra-city road transport company which wishes to expand its fleet of vehicles. RFL is temporarily short of funds. If the funds are invested with RFL, they will produce an annual net cash inflow to Educonsult, but the size of the cash flow is not known with certainty. And cash flows at the end of the second year is dependent upon the cash flows at the end of the first year. Estimates of the net cash inflows to Educonsult are as follows. End of year 1. There are 2 possible cash flows. 160 million with a probability of 60%, or 200 million with a probability of 40%. Now, these are possible outcomes. So if we decide to go with RFL, there are 2 possible outcomes. One is 160 million with a probability of 60%, and the other is 200 million with a probability of 40%. So if we decide to go, with this RFL route, there are 2 possible outcomes. What do we use to designate outcome? We cannot use this because this is decision. So we're going to use our outcome box, which is this. That's what we explain here. If we need to make a decision, we use this. The outcome of the decision, we use this. So when we needed to decide whether to invest in money market or RFL, we use this because it's a decision we need to make. But the outcome would be this. So there are 2 possible outcomes. One is, what's the first one? 160 million with a probability of 0.6%. What's the second one? 200 million with a probability of 0.4. And this is happening at the end of year 1. I mentioned something when we did our explanation on the expected value, on the decision point. We said we would always use the present value. We would always use the present values. So what is the present value at the end of year 1 for 160 million? What is the present value for the 200 million? Very easy, we just discount it. So at the end of year 1, so it would be, let's do that quickly. So I'm going to do my calculation somewhere here. So I'm going to do my calculation. So I'm doing year 1. Okay, so it would be the discount factor multiplied by the amount. So what's our discount factor for year 1? The discount rate, what's the discount rate in the question? We just find the discount factor. We can just find what the present value is. So as per our question, the cost of capital is 18%. So for year 1, what's the discount factor for that? So that would be, for year 1, that would be 1 divided by 1 plus 0.18 raised to the power of 1. Or if you want to use the other formula, 1 plus 0.18 raised to the power of minus 1. So whichever formula you're comfortable with, what do we have? What we have as a discount factor. Okay, so I have 0.847. All right, guys. So let's what will be our present value for 160? It will basically be 160 multiplied by 0.847. What's our present value for the 200? It will basically be 200 multiplied by 0.847. Okay, so let's look at the first one. 160 multiplied by 0.847. I have 136. Then 200 multiplied by 0.847. 200 multiplied by 0.847. We keep it to the nearest million. So I have 169. All right. So present value is, which is what we're going to use basically for calculation, is 136. Present value is 169. All right. So that's off that line, guys. Any question on that line? Okay, so let's get right back to our question and read the next line, and then we'll map it up from there. So let's look at the next line. The next line says, so we've mapped this one. So we can just tick it so that we know that we've done that. So we've mapped this one. So let's move on to map this one. But bear in mind that when we read the question, it says here that the project can be terminated at the end of the first year. So the investment can be terminated at the end of the first year. But look at the first one. It says, if the cash flow in year 1 is 160 million, which is this line, which is this point, this one like this, if it's 160 million, this one, what happens if it's 160 million? Let's go back and read that question. If it is 160 million, there is a probability of 60% that the cash flow in year 2 will be 160 million, and a 40% probability that it will be 180 million. However, before we proceed, we read something in this paragraph which is very handy. Here it mentions that Educonsult can receive the sum of 282 million in year one, or it receives 162 million a year later, which is year two. If it chooses to receive 282 million, it means that the project has to be terminated at the end of the first year. That's what it means. So if Edu decides to terminate it at the end of the first year, it will receive 282 million. If it doesn't terminate it, it will go ahead with year two. Basically, that's what it means. And if it goes ahead with year two, under the 160 million, there's the probability of 60% that the cash flow will be 160 million in year two. And then there is the 40% probability that it will be 180 million. So let's map that in under 160 million. So this is an outcome. So there's a decision here first, which is, should they terminate at the end of year one, or should they continue? And if they continue, there is a 60% probability that they will make 160 million. And there is a 40% probability that they will make how much? That they will make 180 million. So 60% that they will make 160, and 40% that they will make 180. So 40% that they will make 180. So this is year, at the end of, this is year two. Right. So that is year two, at the end of year two, under the 60 line. So can we calculate the present value? Because like we mentioned, we would always use the present value. So can we calculate what the present value would be for year two? That would basically be the same thing. It would be, so this is our year two. It would be the discount factor for year two multiplied by the amount. So can we calculate the discount factor? Yes, we can. So that would be, using our formula, 1 plus 0.18 raised to the power of minus 2. Or if you choose to use the other formula, 1 divided by 1 plus 0.18 raised to the power of 2. Okay, guys, what do we have? 0.718. Keeping it to 3 decimal place because I kept this to 3 decimal place. Okay, so how much would that be then for us? So for this one, it will be 160 multiplied by 0.718. 160 multiplied by 0.718. For the lower line, it will be 180 multiplied by 0.718. 180 multiplied by 0.718. Okay, so how much would that be? Okay, so 160 multiplied by 0.718. 160 multiplied by 0.718. So that gives us 115. Yeah, so that gives us 115. The next one, 180 multiplied by 0.718. That gives us 129. 129. Okay, guys, any question on that first line? Just feel free to make use of the hand raise feature if you have any question. All right, so let's go back to our question quickly and see what happens next. So we've mapped the first line. It says if the cash flow in year 1 is 160, there's a probability of 60% that cash flow in year 2 will be 160 million, and 40% that it will be 180 million. That's what we just finished mapping. So if it's 160, which is this, if it's 160 and we choose to continue, there's probability of that 60% that it will be 160, there's 40% that is 180. If we choose to continue, we can also terminate if we want to terminate it. Now, what if it's 200? What happened? Let's go back to our question. If, however, cash flow of 200 occurs in year 1, there is a 60% probability of a cash flow of 200 million in year 2 and a 40% probability of receiving 220 in year 2. Okay? Okay, well, my question. All right, so this we are. So if it's 200, which is this line, that possible, we can choose to continue or we can choose to abandon. We can choose to abandon, we can choose to continue. Nothing is fixed. So we can choose to abandon or we can choose to continue. Now, if we continue, there is a 60% probability that we will make 200, and there is a 40% probability that we would make 220. So what's our present value? What's our present value? We've only calculated a discount rate for year 2, so it's pretty easy for us. So that would be, we already know the discount rate as 0.718. So that would be 200 multiplied by 0.718, 220 multiplied by 0.718. Those are all year 2 discount rate, discount factor. Right, guys, so what do we have there? 200 multiplied by 0.718. So it's 144 as the present value for this one. Then 220 as a present value for the multiplied by 0.718 gives us 158 as a present value for this other one. So we have 144 and then we have 158. So our present value here is 148. Our present value here is, sorry, 144 rather, and 158. So this is 158, and the guy up is 144. Okay, so 144 and then 158. Guys, any question? We just followed the map as it flows. The only other thing we need to do is that we need to find the present value. All right, so let's go back to our question and follow the flow. So we have mapped this one. Now let's look at the final sentence. It says here, in addition, RFL will make a payment. So in addition to what we have done up to this point, RFL will make a payment to Educonsult at the end of the first year of 282 million, or at the end of the second year of 162 million. So you will receive this or this. This one is for year 1. This one is year 2. You cannot receive both, either the year 1 or the year 2. So when do you receive which? Educonsult has to choose at the end of the first year whether to receive 282 million then or 162 million a year later. If payment of 282 million is received by Educonsult at the end of the first year, the investment will be terminated. So it therefore means that if you decide to take 282, you will not get the benefit of year 2 because you terminate the investment at the end of year 1 if you choose to get 282. So that's why we have this option in our map of termination. So at the end of the year 1, which is this point, at the end of year 1, which is this point, we can choose to terminate the investment and get our 282 million. Or we can choose to continue up to year 2 and get this other benefit. Now, if we choose to terminate the investment, we're going to get 282 million at the end of year 1. What is our present value for 282 million at the end of year 1? So what is our year 1 discount factor? 0.847. So that's 0.847 multiplied by 282. So what's that? So 0.847 multiplied by 282. So that's 239. The present value right here is 239. So the same thing we have on this line. We can choose to abandon or we can choose to continue at the end of year 1. So if we choose to abandon, the same 239. So our abandonment is the same 239 if we choose to abandon or terminate the investment. Now, if we don't terminate it at the end of year 1, this is end of year 1. Now, if we don't terminate it and we proceed to year 2, we're going to get either this or this. But then in addition to that, we're going to get some amount in year 2, which is the year 2 option. So if we don't get 282 in year 1, we get 162 in year 2, which is a year later. So regardless of what the outcome is, we'll get 162, but regardless of what the outcome is. So that means that whatever we have here plus 162. So what is the present value? Whatever the outcome is here plus 162, because that would happen in year 2. Whatever the outcome is here, we've not copied up NPV, PV plus 162. Whatever the outcome is here plus 162, because that would happen regardless of the outcome. That's what we're going to get at the end of year 2. Just like when we abandon, whenever we have abandonment, we have 239. All right. So we didn't copy our present value for the 160 and 180. So that's 115 and 129. So this is 115 and this is 129. Okay. So what is the present value for 162 for year 2? Just multiplied by our discount factor. Our discount factor for year 2 is 0.718. So that's 0.718 multiplied by 162, guys. What do we have? 0.718 multiplied by 162 gives us 116. So that gives us right here. Right, gives us right here 116. 116. 116. 116. Okay. Yeah, then that's the last item on our right. I think that's the last item we have. Yeah, that's the last item. That's the last item. So we're done with the mapping. The next thing would be to solve our decision tree. But before we solve it, I want to be sure that we understand the flow. Please, guys, if you have any question, now is the time to ask. Or I can just take a minute again and walk through it from the very start. Just 2 minutes quickly. All right. So in a decision tree, you just need to follow the flow. If you have to make a decision, we use this box. If the outcome of the decision, we use the circle. So use a square if you need to make a decision. The result of the decision we make, we use a circle. Question: Edu PLC has 402 million. The first thing Edu PLC had to decide or decision they have to make is, do we invest this 402 million in a money market, or do we invest it in RFL? So that's why we have this first line, money market or RFL. So I could just, so that my graph will look fine. I can just draw this one down so that it will look nice. Okay, so do we invest in money market or do we invest in RFL? That's the first decision Edu PLC needed to make. Now the question says that the money market is an efficient market. And we said that if the money market is efficient, it means that the price and the rates reflect perfectly available information. And so the NPV would always be zero where you have an efficient market. And so that is why we have an NPV here of 0. Nothing else happens. Now, but if it chooses to invest in RFL, it is not a straight path. There are a number of possible options, depending on whether it's the first year or it is the second year. Now, in the first year, one of two things can happen, and that is our note 1. In the first year, there are 2 possible outcomes: 160 million with a probability of 60%, or 200 million with a probability of 40%. So that's what we have right here. 160 million with a probability of 60%, 200 million with a probability of 40%. However, we mentioned that in strategic financial management, you would always discount. You would always discount. You would always find a present value. So we have to ask ourselves, what is the present value of 160 million? What is the present value of 200 million? So we found the discount, we calculate the discount factor, which is 0.847. And we just multiply the values by those values. So 160 million multiplied by 0.847, 200 million multiplied by 0.847. So we got 136 and we got 169. So if it is 160, what happened? If it is 200, what happens next? And that's what our question tells us. The question tells us that if it is 160, which is this first line, if it is 160, which is this first line, that there is a 60% probability that will make 160 million in year 2, and there is a 40% probability that will make 180 million. However, this line of the question tells us that we have a choice to abandon or terminate the contract at the end of year 1. So that's an additional point. So if we terminate it, we get this. If we choose to continue, we get 160 million. So we get 160 million, yeah, 60% probability, or we get 180 million, 40% probability. And that's what we have here. So if we choose to terminate, we get our 282. But if we choose to continue under 60, under 160, if we choose to continue under 160, we get 160, 60%, or we get 180, 40%. Now, under this 200 line, what would happen? Let's go ahead. If it's 120, however, if cash flow is 200, we can get 60% probability of getting 200 in year 2, or 40% of 220. So same thing, 200, 60%, 220, 40. So 200, 60%, 220, 40%. We can choose not to continue. We can choose to abandon, just like we can choose to abandon on this line as well. So 200, 220, we need to find out what is the present value. So we just multiply it by the discount factor for year 2, which we calculated as 0.718. Now, the question tells us that if we don't abandon in year 1 and we collect this year 2 values, we will also get an additional amount right here of 162 million. So we'll get, in addition to what we've calculated, we'll get 162 million a year later, which is year 2. So what's the present value for that? 162 multiplied by the discount rate gives us 116. So regardless of what the outcome is, at the end of year 2, we will get 116. At the end of year 2, at the end of year 2, at the end of year 2. All right. So that was a quick walkthrough of the mapping. I want you guys to get the mapping. Are we all good with the mapping? Okay. So if we're all good with the mapping, we just label it, and then in our class on Saturday, we would solve decision tree. So let's label it quickly, and then we can call it a day for today. So we'll label it. So we said we're going to label it from, so we mapped it from right to left. We mapped it from right to left. We're going to label and solve it from right to left. So please take off note. We mapped it from left to right. We're going to label and solve it from right to left. So the last point we have is this and this, which is the last point. So I can begin with the one on top. So I can call this A, call this B, or I can call this A and call this B, because those are the two spots. They are on the same line to the right. So A, B. So I'm moving to the left now. So I've done B, so I can call this C and call this D. I'm moving down to the right from there. And I call this E, and then I can call this F. So I'm going to solve for A. I'm going to solve for B. I'm going to solve for C. I'm going to solve for D. I'm going to solve for E. And then I would find whatever the NPV is, and then find whatever F is. So in our next session, it's 6 o'clock already, we're going to continue by solving for each of these points. We're going to solve from right to left. So we'll solve for A, B, C, D, E, and then we'll find F. Then we can then decide whether to put in the money market or to put our money in RFL. All right, guys. So that's been our session for this morning. Any question, comments? So we can just close that for today. Any question, guys? Okay. So if there are no questions, see you.
Yeah, morning, sir.
Yeah, morning, please. Morning.
Yeah, please. I just want to know, to be very sure, at point
Yeah.
E, from point E.
Yeah.
Where does year 2 start?
Okay. So this is end of year 1, which is point C.
Yeah.
This is end of year 1. I labeled it. So this is year 2, which is where you have the 160, the 180, the 200, and the 220.
That is point A.
Yes, look, point A and point B, depending on whether it's the 160 million line or it is the 200 million line. So let's go back to the question quickly to see what I mean by that. So look at the question. So in year 2, on this 260 million line in year 1, you have 160, 180. On the 200 million line from year 1, you have 200 and 220. So these two are getting to year 2. So there are 2 lines. on the 160 million line from year 1 and the 200 million line from year 2. So on the 160 million line from year 1, you have this in year 2. On the 200 million line from year 1, you have this for year 2. Is that clear? Is that clear?
That's okay. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. You're welcome. Any other question? Please, if you have a question, you can drop a chat. You can unmute yourself and speak. Okay. Okay. So if there are no questions, guys, I think we'll call it a day for today. So please join in our next class. As we would solve this decision tree. We're going to solve all the different points, and then we're going to solve from right to left. So we're moving backward this way until we get back to this point. All right, guys. Have a good day, everyone, and see you guys on Saturday. Thank you so much. Take care.